All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Adam Rack. It's July 31st, 2024. We're at Linfield University, McMinnville. Adam, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Rich.
First question, as you know, why wine?
Why wine? Wine is not the career I thought I'd be in, but I think most people would probably say the same. I first fell in love with it. There was the bottle in my parents' cabinet from their wedding. I did not drink it. It was a bottle of Reuniti. I remember that very clearly, that Italian Lambrusco. And I wondered what it was my whole childhood. It was above the cabinet. It was probably terrible. It was above the oven, specifically. But it was their wedding bottle. And I remember seeing that all the way through really high school, but I never experienced wine. I never drank wine. I grew up in Western Kansas. It wasn't a huge part of the culture. It was, Bud Light, cheap beer. Once I got to college, I started knowing people that were drinking wine, and it was more of an experience. And actually, the first glass I ever had was Bunker Hill Winery, Russell, Kansas, or Salina, Kansas. Little tiny family winery, started in the early 90s. A lot of alcohol, really ripe grapes, but there was something there. It was not the cheap vodka I'd learned in college, and there was more story to it. There was more tied to the soil, tied to the environment. And I think I started feeling that out at the time, just like when many people start getting exposed to things outside of their youth. And through college, I was really into sustainability, farming, sustainable agriculture. I wrote about that a lot in the high school paper. And through college, I started realizing there's a lot of history of wine production in Kansas, which always enamored me because there was nothing left. There was really nothing left. And I found out we had, pre-prohibition, 6,000 acres of grapes planted, and I wanted to learn more, but there just wasn't that much. And didn't really think about it again until I'd say moved out here and fell in love with the industry, as you do. One of my friends and colleagues used to joke that in the 90s you came to Portland to be in a band, and then in the 2010s, that's when I moved here, you came to Portland to be a winemaker, and look where I am. I'm not making wine, but I'm right next to it.
So tell us a little bit about life before wine. You mentioned growing up in Western Kansas. What was kind of early life like, and sort of path into college?
Yeah, I was Hayes, Kansas, town of 20,000, farming community. We had the hospital. That's where my mom worked for most of Western Kansas, and then it was farming. That was pretty much the heart of everything around was agriculture. We had a small family farm that my dad mostly leased out to other farmers, but we still had sort of that exposure to, and he had this mentality of, well, you should be taking care of the earth. He taught me to love flowers. As a masculine male in Western Kansas, you don't usually expose yourself like that. But he really cared for the land that he owned, and he tied to it, and I think I got that from him. So moving to college, that kind of came along with me. We can do better, and we are here to make an impact on the world for a very short period of time. And what does that mean for me? I still don't know. I'm still asking that question. But part of it was, just improving things wherever you can on a daily basis. So college, K-State University, land grant institution. I was in everything. I was my path is super diverse. I was in 5 different degree programs. I was in social work. I got accepted into architecture, which is a little bit different, but and I just ended up loving theater, participating in theater, and that's where I got my degree. And I was really in college for the experience, to learn whatever I could. I learned how to weld. I took welding classes. I took an engineering class, and I dropped the class, and I stayed in the lab because it was really exciting, and learned how to, exactly. I didn't tell the professor until the end of the season, but until the end of the semester, but just learned so much from those processes the whole way through. And my partner and I, after I graduated, he was about to graduate as well, and we were like, what do we want to do? And we just knew we wanted to leave for a while. We thought we would go somewhere for a few years, come back to Kansas, and be back with family, raise a family. We didn't know what that looked like, but we know we wanted to leave for a little bit. And I was working at a plasma clinic at the time. I was running the donor floor at poking people, fixing plasma equipment, medical equipment. And so I could transfer with my company and sort of find where we go from there. And then we had two options, kind of three: Portland, Oregon, Portland, Maine, or Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Very different. You could get a house, 5-bedroom house, for $200 a month, but we chose Portland, Oregon because it was right about that time where things were just really exciting here. There's just the coastal, the Pacific. It had this vibe. So I moved out here sight unseen. My partner Sean took a trip with his parents to sort of scope it out before, and then we landed here. And
What year?
2013. Yeah. So 2014. I graduated in 2013. So 2014, May 15th, I think it was the week that they announced that gay marriage was legal in Oregon. So it was like the day we drove into town, and it was kind of important for us coming from Kansas to be coming to a place that was more open, that was more just like, I still, was in my little closet shell, and pretty quickly learned that like people are here to live and enjoy life and take advantage of the air and hike, and that's what we did for years. We, for the first few years, we hiked every weekend. We went up to Mount Hood. That first winter we were here, it was 50 degrees in the summer. In the winter, we were hiking up on Mount Hood, like in January, which everybody was like, this is not normal. It's going to be terrible next year. You just wait. It's going to be rainy. And I don't remember where the first winery we went to was. It might have been Ponzi. It might have been Cliff Creek in Newburgh. Like there was these few early places we started going and learning about wine and learning about sort of the history of it here, the soils, like how that interacts with grapes, how grape agriculture is so wildly different than what I had researched, which was corn, soy, wheat, and thinking, we can do all of that better. There's a lot of improvement there at a massive scale, but there's these like boutique crops in Oregon, like seed, grapes. We kind of grow a little bit of everything here, hazelnuts, fruits, and there's so much more variation here. There's much more diversity in what we grow and what we do and how we think even. So that was just like a fun moment for me, and I actually came back from work, head down all the time. I was having neck problems because I was just poking people and getting their blood out, and my partner said, hey, there's a job offer at a winery. It's like an assistant winemaker position, and I looked it up, and you don't get assistant winemaker positions, so I was like, I'm not going to get this. I don't know anything about wine except for I enjoy it, and I know the varietals, and I know the basics. And went to the interview. It was with Phil Kramer over at Alex Ellie, tied to Cooper's Hall. And I think he also did not want someone who came in with 100 plans for what to do and wanted someone who could just physically understand things. So I think the first summer there, I welded a new harvest trailer together, our second summer. So there's like all these skills that you come into not thinking they're valuable in your early career, but they really are. So, and then everything just kind of went off the rails from there. So I was in the industry. I was enjoying my time. I was one of the partners left, so I took over sort of more of a management role. Then our sales guy left, so I took over some sales. And then by 2 or 3 years in, I was like kind of mind blown at like how much responsibility I was given, and how I would just come to the partners and be like, hey, this is the idea I want to have. This is the direction we want to go. These are our numbers for the week. And they really helped facilitate that at what I felt like was a very young age. And I think that's a very beautiful thing that I learned from my time, and that I've been implementing wherever I can in my life. It's like, just trust people. Everybody wants to do the best that they can, and give them the skills to make it work. And that's what was given to me really early on in the wine industry. So, but we've really enjoyed our time out here. My partner stayed in the same job for 10 years, just recently got a new one. And it was like maybe 2 years in when we were like, this is home. I don't think we're going back. So Kansas it has my heart. It has a lot going for it, but this is now where I live and where I love the soil and where I love the weather. And so we're in Oregon. So we're here.
It happens to a lot of people.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
All right, so you mentioned you kind of got into the industry without really expecting it, in a role you weren't expecting. Tell me about starting to see the industry from the inside and kind of initial experiences, initial impressions in Oregon wine.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably the sentiment a lot of people have, but it's not the beauty that you see from the outside. We have a very shiny persona as an industry, but on the inside, it's people working incredibly hard every single day to make this product that has just this fleeting moment of joy or sadness or whatever that emotion is when you're consuming it on the table for that brief time. And it spans everything. It spans all the way to this mass market product that is incredibly industrial produced and manufactured, and it tastes the same every single time, to these wild natural ferment wines that are, I don't want to say art, because they're not all, it's not just art. It's just this, you're just letting nature happen. And they taste wildly different from bottle to bottle. So I think that was my first perception. It was like, wow, this is everything. There's the whole spectrum of beauty and production and manufacturing and industry and people. You have the weirdest people in the world in the wine industry, and you also have the most scientific, like incredibly precise people that are doing the exact same thing at the end of the day. They're making the wine, and that's their goal. So that was my first sort of like shock, was that just how different things were. And then it became a little bit more nuanced. I got jaded for a while too, watching the bulk market, how everything works in the back end, and how some people don't make any wine and they aren't transparent. Some people are totally transparent about everything. And I think there's a balance to follow, and it's fun watching people find their way, just as I found my own way to where I'm at today, I guess, but also where they want to be is totally different for what reality and nature gives them sometimes. So
tell me about the work. Obviously starting fairly physical work and into management and sales, things like that. Tell me about the work and what you learned, what you enjoyed about the various roles you had.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was in this industry at, I think, that critical period of growth in life, where you're coming out of college and you're still immature, and then 5 years, 6 years in, you learn things through that period of time. So there's a lot I learned. Well, I got to experience a little bit of everything, so that was the fun part. Diversity in day-to-day is really important for me, and I found that out. I love those days where you commit to, you're just sitting there, bottling wine, doing the same thing over and over and over again, and there's like this rhythm to it, and you're just relaxed and you're in the zone. And then there's the other flip side where you're sitting at a dinner and you're hosting people and telling them about your product, and you're in a totally different state where they have no idea what Oregon Pinot is. So I had a lot of fun with how different everything was and how much there is to learn in the industry. Because selling sustainable wine, as your tagline, we have no packaging waste in Oregon. But you take that message to Kansas and it does not connect. Like so you learn, you craft your narrative, and you say it's not about sustainability, it's about stewardship. It's about making sure we have the materials for the next generation, for our kids, so you can continue farming your land. This is why we're doing what we're doing as a brand. And I think that variation is the sort of zest that made me enjoy the industry. Because you can in this industry too, get into where you just do the same thing every day, or you're in marketing and you don't care about wine whatsoever, but you love marketing. So I got little spices of all of that, and I got to find the parts that I enjoy most, which are that, like, how to make everything work, how to put the pieces together, how to get your idea of a bottle, or bottling, or whatever you're doing, all pieced together and get everything in line. Project management, maybe I would say, is a very boring way to approach it, but it's also my favorite part of the job. It's the gluing together when everything comes out at the end of the day and someone's enjoying it, and then it's gone, and that's beautiful too.
So what was your next step after working there?
So Revino became that step. So I'd say in like 2018, 2017, I had thought through what we were missing at Cooper's Hall, and that was like customer facing. How do we sell a product to a consumer? How do we sell a brand to a consumer who can't go to the store and buy it? They can come to our physical location, get a growler, with a little flip cap, and that's not even legal in many states, and it's still not legal in many states. So we had sort of that problem of how do you sell your product, which people love the wine, but they can't experience it without a very limited opportunity set. So there's some benefit to that, right? Some of that exclusivity that this industry is built on is that, like, well, I can't get it, so I want to get it when I have the opportunity. So that there was that missing consumer engagement piece. So in 2018, the end of the year, I read was at F.H. Steinbart's in Southeast Portland, this little like homebrew shop. It was where we got all of our tap supplies for Cooper's Hall. It was where I'd go and get like those last minute things like citric acid or something for cleaning. We would run over to the store because it was a few blocks away. And the Brewers Guild, I believe, or like a homebrew magazine, had this article about a refillable beer bottle program. And it was coming out. It was launched by OBRC, and it was going to be the first like statewide program to reuse a package. And I went to the partners, I think that afternoon or the next day, and I was like, "Hey, this is going to be crazy, but do you want to put wine in beer bottles?" And I brought one today. This is actually one of the first labels we did, and it's. They said yes, and I was like, all right, let's figure out what that means. So we put it all together. We sort of got the marketing team. We got some people to do the label art, which is absolutely beautiful. A little tattoo artist who does hand painted wallpaper and is sort of in our network, and went through that whole project of starting for an established brand who's been around for I think 6 years at that point, to really just start thinking for the first time about packaging. But we had this set already. We already had who we were. We had what we did. And a lot of that was the through line of sustainable wine and how we get it to you. So it was a really natural evolution of it. But it's still quirky. It's still a beer bottle. So the first time we showed it was early 2019 at a golf expo, I think. 'Cause we just bottled it. We weren't really selling it yet. And we had these on the shelf, and people were like, "Oh, is that beer?" No, it's wine in a refillable bottle. And one of the comments we always got was, "Oh, it's in a bottle." It's like, well, yeah, all wine's in a bottle, pretty much. So that was new for us because we were in kegs before, but we were able to start doing this, and it didn't mean much. We aren't a high volume brand, we didn't have a lot on the shelf, but I thought through what reuse was for customers before, because I had seen Double Mountain doing refill beer bottles back way before, when we first moved to Oregon, really, and it didn't pencil out for a single winery to wash and reclaim their own bottles unless they're a really big brand. And then it actually makes sense. The equipment makes sense. So we ended up participating in the beer bottle program. We had a lot of benefits from that. We were sampling these beer bottles with distributors in like Minnesota, Texas, and what we found was a lot of people wanted the bottles. They liked our wine. They wanted it in a keg, but they kind of wanted the bottle program because they wanted to be a part of it. They saw the benefit, especially in places like Minnesota and Colorado. There's these accounts that were just like, can we send these back to you? Can we have our customers bring them back and we'll give you the bottles back? And I'm like, well, no. Like, we could try to figure it out, but it was hard when you pencil out the economics of it, shipping a pallet back to Oregon to get washed. So in 2020, the pandemic hit. We were sitting on a bunch of wine, like everybody, and it was a really rough period of time. And we got placements, way more than other people were at that time. Everybody wanted to get their bottles on a retail shelf because retail was the only place that was open. And we got placed at, I think, 64, 68 Safeway Albertsons stores, which we couldn't support as a small brand, but it's pretty incredible to have that engagement with just the package. The fact that it was refillable was a strong suit for them. They were kind of trying to understand what sustainability is for their brand, I think. I'm not speaking for Safeway Albertsons, but that was clearly part of it. And we came out of the pandemic, sort of recorded some podcasts around really what sustainability is, which we had, Phil Kramer and I had these hours-long conversations around like what matters. Like if you spray your crops, if you spray your grapes one extra time, 2 extra times, it's a ton of extra time and labor. But what if you didn't spray and you maybe lost 5% more, or your grape clusters are that much smaller? Maybe that's better for your soil, for your environment, for what you exist as in the big scheme of things. And I think that led me to Revino. So I met Keenan. We were recording a podcast. He was on the show. He had been thinking about what reuse looks like with this little sort of concept of Revino. And it led into this. So I kind of was working both at Cooper's Hall and starting a company, which at some point I could not pay that much attention to both and split attention. So made that jump in 2023, full time. So last harvest was the last days. 2023 was the last few days that I spent on the crush pad. And then it was driving around to wineries and saying, hey, can I help you a little bit? Because I don't know what to do with my time. I'm used to working 12-hour days, 14, 16-hour days during harvest. And then it was full speed ahead on what reuse is. How do we make this happen at scale?
So go back to that in a minute, but I'm curious about, obviously, the Cooper's Hall. Might be good to explain Cooper's Hall a little bit, because it's such a unique piece of Oregon wine, I feel like. So tell me about, before the beer bottles, what exactly Cooper's Hall was and how it kind of has evolved.
Yeah, Cooper's Hall's special. I joined, so that was my first industry job, but in the job description, it was like the sustainable winery. There wasn't much to it, but it was like, we don't do bottles. It was like, we don't do any wasteful packaging. And that was it. So that's what piqued my interest. And it is just a wonderful group of people. So Phil Kramer, Alex Ellie Vineyards, he had a bottler. He did all the traditional. He still bottled through a few years into Cooper's, but he was doing kegs. And that was pretty early on in the keg scene. They tried it back in the 80s with a brand called Mastercraft. I think it was owned by like Anheuser-Busch or Coors. And honestly, not quality wine. It was meant for like pubs or, sort of bars, dive bar type places. And the equipment wasn't there. So things oxidize, brass interacts with wine in very different ways than beer does. So Cooper's was kind of at that beginning edge of when you figure out all the parts and pieces, put them all together to make a system work. And they had figured most of it out, or a lot of it, when I came on board. So there's still a lot of technical things to change, but it is a brand that was built around no single-use packaging. It was a brand of kegs. And I think the original concept was, we'll source wine from all over, and put it in keg and sell it out to the world in the most sustainable format possible. What works for restaurants, this works for those venues from big to small, which is beautiful because a lot of wine goes wasted. So it was a format that allowed a lot of venues and places to consume wine in a very different way, and in a more affordable way at the end of the day. So you're able to pour a keg of Cameron Close Electric, and if someone orders a glass, you pour it, and if someone doesn't order a glass for another 6 weeks, you're fine. Like nothing went bad, and that's beautiful. And at the same time, if you're pouring 26 bottles in a day for a wedding, which Cooper's Hall did a lot of wedding venue. It was a wedding venue as well. It is. Does a lot of weddings. You can pour 8 different wines all at once, and you can pour through 200 bottles, and there's no trash. There's no hauling glass away. There's no corks that you have to take out and pause. You just pull a tap and you close it again. And that caught on pretty quickly, but it was still a selling. We had to tell people why to do it. And it was a fun environment. We collaborated pretty intensely to try to figure out what is that messaging for restaurants? Why would you, as a restaurant, spend $1,000 to get some equipment just to allow yourself to pour wine just like you're already doing today? But it made sense. As we talked through everything, we built a pretty strong case for it. We made sure that here's why you do this. There's so many reasons. It's not just the environment. It's your time, how much labor you're spending, your wrists when you're opening corks day in and day out, when you're doing all these other things as a bartender. So there's so many reasons to do something, but it's still hard for people. And that was shocking to me, but also it was great because we just sit and talk about why we're doing this, and we all believed why at the end of the day for various reasons. Sometimes I think one of the partners, Joel, came at it because it's practical. I can literally do this and I can have 18 wines open and have a wine list that I don't need to pour from every day, and I don't have any waste. And then there's the other side, which is Phil's side, the winemaker side, which is we shouldn't be wasting my grapes. Every grape is worth something. I did all that by hand, from infancy of the grape, the beginning of the season, all the way to the end. So it was a really fun environment, and the exposure to weddings too is it's fun. It's fun to show people what they get to drink on their special day, and it's a whole industry of its own, but it definitely overlaps with wine and with drinks and celebrations. So it's a very positive spin on the industry.
So introducing bottles of any kind to Cooper's Hall was a big thing for you, and so the fact that they said yes is awesome. Tell me about rolling it out and getting consumers interested in wine and beer bottles.
Yeah. I think none of us were a marketing team, right? So, and that's true for a lot of wineries. We are all small teams until we're big, unless there's a huge amount of money outlaid right at the front. So it was a learning experience, of course. We got people to make things pretty. We knew how to make things look pretty. We had the weddings, we had all these events, and graphic design too, but there was a lot of communication around what is the story and how does it fit with the brand, and that's really good to level set anywhere you're doing a new thing. And we went from these are, I don't know, they're sustainable. That was kind of the story at the beginning to this is a beautiful through line with the grapes and the making sure that when we source our crops, when we source our fruit or finished wine, or for extra blending, whenever we're doing anything, we had this story of we do it with intention. We do it with the idea that things come out the way they come out to not degrade the world, to add something, add joy, add a positive influence somewhere. And that's kind of an ethereal concept, but especially when you're talking about a luxury product, and we talked about that a lot. It's how do we make accessibility a part of this? The size was great, so we added language around, well, it's 3 glasses. It's your Wednesday night bottle. You can open it and it's not going to go bad, and you're not going to feel terrible the next morning because you just decided to finish the rest of the bottle. So the size was a lot of it that we built the marketing around, and then also, like, why do we throw away our wine bottles? Why do we try to recycle wherever recycling is? When we don't throw away the glasses that we use, we don't throw away our beer glasses, we don't throw away mason jars, these things that just sit in our cabinets and sometimes pile up in some instances. But we throw away the package that we spent maybe 45 minutes. I think at one period I heard we had this statistic that was the average bottle gets purchased and opened within like 45 minutes. So it spent all of its time in this thing, and you really only need that bottle for 45 minutes, and then you chuck it. So that story ties in with wine. It's seasonal, it's regenerative, it comes back. Grapevines are incredibly vigorous. They will grow and grow and grow and grow, and you kind of have to keep them tamed in. So why are we treating the things that are also usable for a long time different? And that was how we built a lot of our marketing and how we messaged what a reusable was. But it was pretty early on we learned you have to make a clear line between recycling and reuse, because recycling is often seen as, oh, we're reusing the material, so it's recycling, it's reuse, right? But it's not. Like, they're so infinitely different, and one of them usually just ends up in the landfill at the end of the day, statistically, and the other can see so many lives, and there's a beauty in that. So we talked about that a lot. It's hard as a small team to bring all of those stories into a consumer-facing marketing campaign. So it was always small. It was always like, okay, let's adjust things. Let's learn from the messaging we're using today. How do we engage? And really, a lot of that's leveraging other people selling your wine. So it's making sure that people that sell in the grocery store, the wine stewards, understand what they are and why they're different, why they're important as a part of like this wider narrative around making our economy exist in 10, 20, 30 years, make sure we can keep making wine in a while. And that was kind of where we left off, but it didn't fit. It's not a perfect fit. There's so much tradition in wine that selling that beer bottle of wine is still, even to this day, is a big mental jump from a wine bottle of wine. And it's the same thing. It's just a package that holds, and it's glass. It's generally shaped like a bottle. There's not a lot different, but it's still this like really strong break. And I think that came over to my work today, which is like why we still need these traditions that we lean so heavily on. And that's part of Cooper's still. They're still selling it. They still have this really committed little wine club, small wine club. And you go chat with them again to see how it's all going. But I know they're also still excited about Revino and these bottles. So to take that one step of extra education out. But it's a lot easier still than saying, well, take this empty growler, bring it to a different location, make sure it's clean, and then we'll fill it somewhere, and then you can take it home, and then you have to remember to come pick it up again. So it's convenience. It's got to be convenience at the end of the day.
So you mentioned that you met Keenan on a podcast. Tell me about meeting him and about starting the relationship.
Yeah. So with Cooper's, we had a lot of fun experiences. Like we did a study with Metro. I don't have the details around it, and I wish I did. But we did a study that was mostly focused on the beer industry and like cider. But it was like, what is the distance of your packaging to where it makes like the most sense sustainability wise? And we had a partner, so I think Double Mountain and Gigantic both worked with someone who was doing their thesis project on marketing refillable packaging. It's Mary Rose Walker. She was a DM at Miletus, who was our distributor at the time. And she did this project on how do you market a refillable package? Like, what's different about it? What do consumers engage with? What do customers want when they're thinking about packaging? And I had talked to her about this. We interviewed and talked about how wine was so different in a bottle, but at the same time, it's still a reusable package. Like, that's the through line there. And didn't really think about it. She mentioned that someone else in the Willamette Valley, somewhere down here, was thinking about reusable bottles. We also knew that someone down here, and I came to find out Erica Landon with Walter Scott, Jess Pierce, there's a whole sustainability committee when those refillable beer bottles launched that tried to get an OI, like locally manufactured refillable wine bottle. And it was supposed to come out kind of at the same time, but it was a bunch of very committed but still volunteers who were also running full-time wineries at the time. So that never came to fruition. And going back to Mary Rose Walker, I reached back out to her again. I was like, hey, Joel and I are recording this podcast called Winesplained. Don't listen to it. We signed on for 12 episodes, and it was just a podcaster up the street from us at Cooper's Hall that was like, hey, we're doing really cheap podcasts. We're trying to launch this network. $100 an episode, which is dirt cheap, edited, put online, ready to go. We recorded 7 out of 12 that we paid for. But it was really just talking about, like, what are we doing? We've had these conversations internally for years, but like, what is the bigger scale of the problem, which is like making sure that we're making things today in a manner that allows us to continue existing as an industry in smoke, in wildfires, in heat, in all of this other stuff 50 years from now. So we talked about labor, sustainability, what healthcare looks like when people are kneeling down in a vineyard to harvest grapes very low down. And Keenan, I reached back out to Mary Rose Walker and I was like, who are these people you talked about like 6 months ago? And she got me in touch with Keenan. And I was like, hey, we're doing this podcast on packaging. He was like, I've thought about this. I'd love to be on the show. And that was the 7th episode. We recorded it. And the next week I was like, hey, I don't know. Can we meet? Like, can we talk about what you're doing more? And like, how do we get this off the ground? And he was like, yeah, let's meet up. We got coffee. We have a third co-founder at the time named Austin. And sort of was like, I want to do this. I think I'm ready for something else. I think I'm ready to move on from Cooper's. For the last 2 years, Joel there had been like, what else do you want to learn? Like, what else do you want to know in your time? So I really focused on the business side of Cooper's for the last year, 2 years I was there. And we just agreed basically we want to make this happen. And then we got together over and over again and figured out what it needs from the wine perspective. It seemed like I was very much the only one from the industry to fine tune what they had already put together. And then we just got a lot of input. So it's everybody I knew already, a lot of people he knew from business, from MEDP, or not MEDP, there's the manufacturing extension folks that he has a mentor that works for them. And we just pieced it all together. What does it need? It needs to be a wine bottle shape. We know that because I had come from that uphill marketing campaign. And so we decided, okay, let's figure out how to find a glass manufacturer. And so we're this little startup based in Willamette Valley who's reaching out to Gallo Glass and being like, can you make us a little bottle? And they were like, sure, 5 million cases. That's our minimum. And it's okay, that's too high. So, keep talking, keep learning about the glass industry, which is it's a whole other wheelhouse that we rely on in the wine space, but we have no idea really how a lot of it works. And it's incredibly complicated. But we ended up meeting the people that were sort of in charge of developing this, the sales rep that worked with OI Glass. That was our first relationship with OI, and ended up saying okay, this is why you need to do this as a company. So we were this little startup making a pitch deck for like the largest multi-billion-dollar glass manufacturer, glass packaging manufacturer in the world. We're like, do this. Like, you should be doing this. This is your best avenue forward for ensuring like a long life of the glass industry. And I think they were also doing this same internal conversation. What sustainability really is. What are we doing in our furnaces? Really calculating their impact. And they had invested a lot in sustainability in the recent period. And I think everything just lined at the right time. And that's where it all started.
So tell me about approaching the industry and about sort of your expectations and initial feedback.
Yeah, well, I mean, I already know a lot of people in the wine industry. So I did get a lot of feedback early on. Jess Pierce, who also joined us in that refillable beer bottle program. She was one of those early people I talked about, which is like, she gets it done. Like, she sees the vision, she sees why we need to do something, she goes and does it, she does it, she executes. And so she was really great in helping sort of some initial contacts, like who else down here is helpful. I think Pat Dudley from Bethel Heights was one of those really early, like, people we talked with and really started thinking like, well, this is what we're thinking. She was like, well, maybe this part won't work, or this is really interesting. Let's figure out. So a few meetings here, a few meetings there. I'd say we also had, you learn a lot in those first few conversations with what you think a viable model is, and then how someone else perceives it. And it was, I'd say, like, there's a lot of perseverance that you have to have doing anything new, but this is especially, the number of people that I think continue to this day to say like, well, this reuse, we did this in the 50s or 60s, or like, it's never going to work, or it's not going to work for wine. But I think a lot of where the confidence came in knowing that this can work and knowing we can do it and we should be doing it is when we went overseas to talk to people. When we we connected with the people in Austria who have had a refill wine program going statewide for 14 years, I think, 2014, so 10 years. And they're like, yeah, we wash the bottles and we reuse them. Like, we all agreed as a group to make a bottle that we use the same bottle. It doesn't hurt our brand. It benefits us because we're coming to this collectively and we are making an investment to share this package and give something back to the world. And everyone that buys it in the area knows it's a refillable bottle now, and they take it back, and it has another life. So it's viable. It was happening. And then we took a trip to Italy to go see the equipment in action. We met with a manufacturer. We toured a winery that had been using a machine. They bought it in 2006. And, reuse was the beer thing. Reuse is what in mineral water comes in reusable packaging. But if you look at the broad scale, like, wine still wasn't in the reuse space. One of the bottle washing manufacturers actually developed a bottle washer for wine bottles, but then it sort of scattered into beer and water and all these other things. And you go to Italy and you talk to these people at Cantina Gandino, I think was the name of, there's two brothers. They love motorcycles and they love wine, making wine. They showed us their little Ducatis that they had fixed up. And they had just been doing this since 2006. And nobody's asking them why. It's the most realistic thing for them to do is to reuse the bottles that they have. So they've been doing it. They don't have any problems with it. They don't even have any inspection equipment on those bottles when they come out. That's very, everyone likes to make fun of Italy, I think. But they're doing it. That's the other side. It's, we make fun of them, but at the same time, they make equipment and they just get it done. And they don't market it. It's not a part of a big scheme campaign. It's just one winery washing bottles and collecting their bottles back, and they don't have to buy glass. And that's great for them. And so those initial conversations we had kind of focused on their model, which is, okay, well, you have your bottles here. You sell them pretty regionally, pretty locally, and you collect them back yourself. So we started sharing that with some wineries initially, and Then we took a step back and realized like it actually doesn't matter. Like what's our wash rate right now? 0 or like 0.05%. It's the bottles we reuse in our tasting room or for samples when we're doing blendings. So how do we design a bottle that, there's maybe a greenwashing feel to it? And I think we were too scared of what greenwashing is, and that seems to have gone by the wayside now. No one seems to care about it, but we didn't want to be doing something that wasn't truly impactful. So we wanted wineries to focus locally, and there's a lot of wineries where that makes sense, where selling your bottles to your neighbors, or especially Southern Oregon, they have a huge amount of wineries that just sell to their neighbors, and they're built around that direct-to-consumer model, but local for the most part. So it's perfect for them. But when we talk to really anyone larger than that, or anyone who distributes out of that state, then it becomes, well, how do you get the bottles back? And so that first 3-month window where we started engaging with wineries, I think we told that story of, well, we think like this is our best case for them. And then at the end of that 3-month, it was like, well, why are we limiting ourselves to that? Because it does need to be a package that we can all just say, okay, well, we have distributors now in XYZ state, and we have a bunch of restaurants who want to collect these and send them back. You know, when you have a certain number of people, you can make that pencil out. You can ship them somewhere else. You can wash them, reclaim them, reuse them, because we're giving value to an otherwise negative value piece of trash, you know, by making it a refillable bottle that you just send wherever you want. We can eventually get there and reclaim it. It has value still. It's not a piece of trash. And I think that's about that 4th month of talking with wineries was when we started saying, okay, let's look at this very differently. This is just about how do we, as a group, decide what packaging works for us. And it may not work for the marketing teams right now. It may not be the right color that we want. But, you know, how can we look at the broader scale and say, like, what does this mean in 10 years? Can a refillable bottle be the standard? A reusable bottle be the standard? And we came in right at this time where reuse had a big resurgence in conversation. Upstream, which is a nonprofit, has been working on this for like 20 years. But there's a lot of other conversation happening at the same time with trash, because plastic recycling is not working. And there's been huge investments in it, and everything is just staying stable, or maybe even going down a percentage. But if we start to think differently about the packaging we manufacture, which was a conversation that was happening beyond the wine industry, it was every industry. Procter & Gamble's thinking about this, you know, Unilever is thinking about, well, what if our packaging isn't trash? What if it's purely recyclable? Or how do we design it to be recyclable easier? And then a step beyond that, how do we design it to be reusable? And going towards something more standardized was really important there. So that was a lot of the conversation. It was like, what will you even use that looks the same as your neighbor's bottles? And there's no exclusivity. You know, if you see your neighbor using a bottle one year, but it's your bottle, unless you own that design, your neighbor can buy it too. There's really no difference between thinking something is your own, aside from like the time you've invested in it, which is important. It's important that you have that perspective from your marketing teams that make it seem like, well, this is our thing, so people recognize it. But if you start talking to consumers as well, they don't, most of the time they don't, you know, notice the slight variation in the bottle. They know your brand now. Once you have that customer in your grasp, it's just about keeping in touch with them and keeping them aware of maybe those slight changes to your branding, or getting them in-house and making them come visit you again. And that was another thing we learned really early on, was like, well, this can be that opportunity. Like, this can be the opportunity. That was the opportunity at Cooper's, was we had people come back and bring our growlers back. And so we had people come and visit and eat dinner and enjoy and book their event there because they kept coming back. So now we have a package that encouraged their consumers to come back into the door again. It's one more excuse to, hey, let's go back to the winery and bring our bottles because we have 6 of them sitting around. And we care, because people do care, but it has to be convenient. So now we can say, well, bring this bottle back to any winery that works. So we started building this network and this vision for, everybody is here doing a shared mission, improving the world we have. And that was the early stages of it, but it really got into where we are today, that broader vision for, it's just a package, but if it's a package that can be reused, then we have a case to build the systems around it.
So from those initial conversations, tell me about milestones for you. What were the biggest sort of moments in the development up to today? What are the biggest things that have happened?
Yeah, I'd say, one, just agreeing that like, we want to do this. Like 2-3 people came together and said like, hey, let's do something crazy and commit a lot of our life and our time to this. And I think it's not a milestone, but that's set the foundation for like, we're here for this. The next milestone was really getting a glass manufacturer on board. Because if you talk to the glass industry, especially some of the older players who are in the industry and been there, and we've talked to people that are, consulting for 45 years in the industry, and they're like, this is not what the industry should be supporting. Why would anyone support that? Because glass is about keeping this giant furnace, this huge machine constantly spewing out product. So it's like the pinnacle of, you can't stop that because it costs a lot of money. And even if one day you're down, 6 hours you're down, you're not making something. And that's not like most manufacturing. It's totally opposite of wine, where it's seasonal and it depends on what you do and what you are given by nature in a year. The glass industry is the opposite. It's about pumping out product uniformly day after day after day after day. So when you talk to some people in the industry, it's like, well, we need more volume. We always need more volume, and plants keep shutting down because we're going overseas for our glass. And there's that period right between, I'd say like 2010 maybe. I'm not the glass expert here, but like 2010 through 2020, you go to look at where we're getting our glass here in Oregon, the wine industry gets their glass. We have three manufacturing facilities in the Pacific Northwest region. One wasn't producing wine bottles and that's the Portland plant, until I think 2019. But the other two, that's all they did. Kalama and up near Seattle. They were just producing wine bottles. And that industry has really been struggling, especially like Ardagh glass, because you can go get that same bottle and it's excellent quality. They manufacture fantastic glass in China for now less than anything you can make in the United States. But it was happening at the same time we were having a conversation, well, we need to buy things locally. But at the same time, we're also thinking about 2 cents a bottle, 3 cents a bottle, what we can save if we multiply that. And we're not thinking long term, because that's not how a lot of business works. It's about what you can afford now and where you can save money and where you can cut costs to keep things as cheap as possible. And having a manufacturer that should be incentivized to totally eliminate and prevent the use of refillable, reusable bottles coming on board and understanding that this is a critical part of their future, like of their existence, of making glass the material that is the most sustainable option on the market versus, when you just do a carbon calculation, we should all be using bag-in-box, we should all be using cans, and we should all be using little plastic bags for our wine because it's a low impact. But we can't do that. Like if we're thinking about a $75 bottle of wine, financially, or the marketing side says, no, you can't do that. But also the lifespan wise, we can't age bottles of wine in anything but glass. So then it just becomes this long existential crisis of like, do we want to buy glass that's made here or do we not? And how do we support that? And we really believe there's a case for saying, well, if we have a reusable economy, we have all these benefits for this glass manufacturer because we're encouraging people to use the glass again because reusing a glass bottle is the most sustainable option by energy, water usage, carbon dioxide, whatever. But if you're using a single-use glass bottle, it's incredibly intensive. You're melting sand into molten lava, basically, to make something that we use, I mentioned earlier, for like 45 minutes at the end of the day. So reusing that material before you crush it Also gives us, we're giving value to the glass, so we're bringing it back in house before we reject it. If it's chipped, we've already washed it and inspected it, and it's clean. So there's that case to say like, well, this is the best feedstock for your furnaces. This is a pure, clean bottle that has no metal in it. There's no paper label anymore. You just pop it right back in the furnace. So that was a really big milestone for us, was convincing, and maybe not convincing, they might have seen it. They support reuse globally elsewhere, but knowing that we had that support, because if we didn't have that support, we would be making our own or importing our own bottles, and that's also what a lot of wineries don't want to do anymore. Some other milestones were really, we had this big meeting, webinar with like 75, 85 people on it really early in our time. I'd say about 6 months after we started. It's the summer of 2022, and it was like, well, this is what we want to do. These are our model. We had gotten OI on board and really started developing this bottle itself, and we had this conversation with a bunch of wineries. It was like, would you use this? Why wouldn't you use this? Fill out our form, fill out our survey, and tell us what you need to see. And knowing that we're building this with the wine industry was sort of it wasn't a milestone, but it was this like guiding light for us, which was like, we're not here to tell you what we're doing. We're here to build something that you need, that we all want to see to meet our carbon goals, to meet our Scope 3 emissions goals, or just to have crops growing, to have vines that can, those Pinot that can survive the weather that we have in 50 years. And, we're a product that doesn't need to exist. We're a luxury product. So there's, I think, an even stronger imperative for us as an industry to think through these things, because we can afford it. We can try out regenerative agriculture. So I'd say another milestone was really just like getting glass out there. That was a make it or break it for a lot of people. I think a lot of people who are supportive or like loved this from the beginning, but just were super skeptical that you could, like a little startup in Oregon could get glass onto the market, because it's a big industry and it's slow moving and it's 100-something years old, and we are able to actually launch it. And that's when I think it became more real for a lot of people. Was, okay, well, I can actually order bottles. Like, so we're here now. Let me start talking to you seriously. And that was our most recent one. And then I'm sure there's all those little mileposts in between, but those were our biggest wins. I'd say that got us to where we are.
So what comes next then? What are the milestones you haven't reached yet?
There's so much that comes next. This is still just a tiny slice of the market. It's a tiny slice of the pie. We still haven't met with, I love the industry, but also getting in touch and communicating clearly with 1,000 different winemakers is incredibly difficult.
Tell me about it.
Just like herding cats, Some people are totally on top of it. Some people have never even heard of us yet, despite having a lot of conversation in the back end and, having a lot of word of mouth. We're a small team. So bringing on more people is really, we're working through our fundraising round right now, and it's really just like been 2 years of being like, we're just kind of bootstrapping this. And now it's this bringing on those next stages, and at the same time as planning for like the launch of our wash facility. That's another like milestone that's coming up late this year. Locking in these partnerships with distribution partners, distributors to collect from restaurants. That's kind of like right where we're at in the middle of it. And then thinking about this outside of Oregon, not just for a like as a business, but also like as for our Oregon customers that have been talking about this first, for the wineries that want to see this because they need it. Anyone who's in IWCA, International Wineries for Climate Action, knows that packaging is the biggest problem. So now it's setting that scope of, okay, we all know this is something we want to do. This is something that seems viable, at least for the moment. And it's kind of necessary if we want to stay in glass, if we want to stay the wine as we know it. So now it's engaging with those bigger clients that we've been talking to, those giant wineries that are selling 300,000 cases and want to see this happen. Now the next step is saying, okay, well, here we are. Come with us. Like, come on this journey and let's build it together, because once again, we can't tell you everything you need. We can't convince every single person on your team that this is the right way right now for your brand, but what does that look like for you? So we can build this to what you need. So I'd say the next milestone is really like 2025. It's like, who's joining us in this to make this happen at scale? And that's the thing that keeps me up at night too. It's like, how do we do this? Everybody wants to do it. Everybody's supportive for the most part. There's not that many naysayers that say like, I don't see why, because everybody sees why we should do this. So now it's saying, I feel like I also need to. Like, I feel like this is the right direction for me as a brand, for us as an industry to continue leading those conversations around regenerative agriculture and everything. And now it's packaging. And there's kind of this little through line that continues happening. Like, regenerative agriculture started, it was elsewhere, it was this hippie thing, you know, like in Kansas where I grew up, there's the Jackson, Wes Jackson had a place called the Land Institute, and he's a writer, philosopher, poet, but they had this idea long ago for like perennial crops. And now you talk to farmers, even 15 years ago, 10 years ago when I was in college, perennial crops were like, it's a crapshoot. You're never going to get to it. We know how to grow things right now. We just spray things this time of year and you get this, and then there's the end of the day. And I was laughed at when I would ask those questions in crop science class in college. But what do you know? There's a regenerative agriculture program now in ag colleges all over the country. And it's now this next step. And I think we're at that same spot for wine. We're continuing to lead the conversation here because we need glass packaging, because the costs, the economics pencil out to reuse wine bottles versus reusing a plastic water bottle. It's just the disparity is so drastic that now's the time for us to say, like, we are the ones leading this. Let's continue leading it. Let's make it a reality in that same way that regenerative agriculture wasn't a thing before, and now it's a thing. Let's make that the same thing for packaging. So next milestone is just like, it's not a milestone, it's up in the sky. It's making this available to other people in every state across the country.
So kind of last question for you. Tell me about, I guess, on that note, what is the longest term vision? What do you, when you look back at Revino, what do you hope it will have accomplished?
I hope that we were that catalyst for real sea change in how we view packaging. We know there's some other like leaders in the consumer packaged goods market, which are kind of surprising. It's like L'Oreal is, you know, like makeup and soap and shampoo and stuff like that. They're like really thinking about this. But when you think about like a refill for a lipstick that's already in a tiny little package, and then you ship a refill in a lighter package than the actual thing that you're carrying around, it's just not a huge impact at the end of the day. But if we can start saying, okay, well, all your shampoo can now be in this, like, we hope we are part of that conversation, making that a reality by just setting the groundwork for, this is where we're at, this is possible. We've put together all the people in the supply chain to get on the same page, basically. And I know that's happening in those big companies. You know, we've had those conversations with people at some of the major grocers, and they're like, okay, I kind of see this is possible today. And now it's, I think, knowing that we are a part of building the confidence to say, like, well, now we can do it for other things. Like, it's not this overwhelming hurdle. It's just starting to think about things differently. It's starting to think about the packaging as part of what we design for right up front. It's a part of our marketing. And wineries are really starting to grasp that. It's like, we are leading this conversation, and let's continue to lead it. And I hope we were the catalyst to make that happen, make it a reality. And we hope to, of course, be a name in houses that people understand where that Revino bottle goes back to. But if we're eclipsed by, Coca-Cola coming back in, I'm fine with that. Like, we've had those conversations. We know that they're watching us as well, which is kind of incredible. But now it's a time to change. Like, we're trying to make that change happen, to say, like, it's not about what consumers want. We know consumers want this. So it's about what we provide them as a manufacturer. It's our responsibility to give customers something that can be reused, that really is sustainable, that is part of this wider ecosystem of setting the groundwork for 2 more generations to come in and make wine. And I don't want to see what happens in rural Kansas, which is pumping that groundwater until there is no more. And a lot of farmers have that mindset of, I want my kids to take over. And you can't do that anymore. It's not reality. So I want to be a part of that sea change to where we say, this is the reality. Like, we can do this. We can do better. And we can give something to our kids. That's a small thing to ask for, but it's a big thing to make happen. So.
Absolutely. All the questions that I have for you. Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover that you'd like to cover today?
No. I didn't cover any hobbies or anything. I don't know.
What do you do outside of wine?
Oh, outside of wine. Running in lovely Oregon has been a lot of it. Baking. The sourdough trend was super pandemic heavy, but I was lucky enough to have my sourdough starter before. And it all goes together. I mean, you have fermentations and farming and wine, and then it's how do you manage the stress of anything? It's exercise. And I think one of the things I really loved about the wine industry early on, and which we did at Cooper's Hall, was join the Wine Country Half Marathon as a group, and we all ran it. It was super fun. It was the tradition. And in 5 a.m. in the morning, we would get the pour on out, the Spanish, where it just spits at your face, and we'd all share a splash of wine before you went on a run. So that was really fun. Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us today. Congratulations on success so far.
Cool.
And
Thank you.
Best wishes for the future.